I am so excited to be going live shortly with Miss Lena Asher. Give me a called Dreamtime Learning. We're going to be talking about the rise of autism cases. Hi, Lena. How are you?
Hello, so lovely to see you online.
So lovely to see you. Can you hear me?
I can, absolutely.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. This is such a great way to start the new year.
Indeed it is, indeed it is.
It
So,
is. It
so
is.
tell me a little bit about the work you do. I'd love to know
Awesome.
more.
Awesome. Okay, it's great because usually whenever I do these, I'm the one who's asking questions, so it's great to be asked questions. I'm a writer, I'm an artist, but I run a beautiful foundation which works with low-income schools in the space of autism. Selena, what we try to do is we train social workers in autism, and then we place them in low-income schools and they work with autistic kids and try to get them included in mainstream curriculum. And that's brain bristle for you.
So, firstly,
I think we lost her. Sorry, I think we lost you. Yeah,
I
sorry,
don't,
you're back. We lost you for a
I
second.
don't know what happened there.
I know. You're back.
So we're so well aligned. Firstly, I must thank you for the incredible work you're doing, especially with low-income schools. We need so many more people like you. And I always say with Dreamtime Learning, I'm saying that really to reshape our world, we must first transform our education. Young kids must think in ways that are steeped in higher consciousness learning. We want a world that's kinder, more empathetic, more loving,
Yeah.
and more mindful, right, of the choices and the decisions and the way we treat others and all of that. So
Yeah.
it's wonderful. It's wonderful to know about the work you're doing. And I'd love to know more about, one of the things that my nephew is autistic. He's got a condition called ADNP, and I've always been interested in.
I think we're losing Lena a little bit. I'm gonna try and invite Lena again. Sorry. Oh, you're back. Yeah. Sorry. What?
What's happening here.
Maybe it's the network. Sometimes that happens. Yeah. No
So my
worries.
yeah, so my nephew on the autistic spectrum. He's got a disease called ADNP. But I've been somebody who's wanted to be inclusive as a school with Kangaroo Kids when we started, and then Billabong High, and now with what we're doing with Dreamtime Learning. One of the things that kind of strikes me, and I don't know if it's just a case of more sort of that we have more tools to kind of diagnose these things. But is autism on the rise?
It is. So before, like, I'm curious. First, tell me what does Dreamtime Learning do, and then I want to chat with you about autism, just so I know how much do you guys work in the space of autism and all of that.
So Dreamtime Learning is a learning solution. It's like an Intel that goes inside a computer. It's a like a software that can run the whole academics of a school. And we actually have it in three verticals. We have an online school. We have a hub, which is inclusive. And we have we license the curriculum B2B. And a large part of our curriculum is teaching kids about neurodiversity, how to include everyone, and
That's awesome.
both, right?
That's
Yeah.
amazing. So because I've heard of Kangaroo Kids, and I know like the incredible work that you've done with other schools. So this was new, and I'm super excited to hear about this. That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. So autism on the rise. So basically, yes. Autism first came to being, Lena, in 1905, and then like 1911, Leo Kanner described it as autism. So it's actually been like almost like 120, 25 years since it was first found. Which what happens to a definition is it expands a lot. At that time, there was one door to saying this child is on the spectrum of autism. Today, there are 100 doors. So better diagnosis, more awareness, more resources. That's one of the most obvious reasons. 30 to 40% of the cases that we're seeing still since 1911 to today is because of genetics. And I think that because our world is getting more globalized, that's my hunch, that because our world is getting more globalized, our genes, our intergenial mixing is a lot more. That could be one of the reasons why we're seeing a rise. There's also a lot of talk around chemicals like lead, mercury, pesticides that we're consuming that could be causing autism, because at the end of the day, it's a it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. And usually your hippocampus and your thalamus, that gets affected because of the chemicals that go into your body. They also, like, one of the most obvious and found findings is phthalimide, VP8, valproic acid. Exposure to these, and these drugs were used for epilepsy. Exposure to some of these drugs for a fetus can, especially in the early months, is just a very obvious chance of the child being born on the spectrum. So these are some of the more recognized obvious causes. Vaccine, which people freaked out about, mumps, rubella vaccines, are not a cause of autism or causing the rise in autism. But if a mother has rubella during her pregnancy, that increases the chance of autism.
So one of the questions I have for you, and I'm asking this, I live in a home in Bombay, and then I also have a home in Goa that I live in, right?
Yeah.
And what I find is when I'm in Bombay, I feel like I feel like I'm in sensory overdrive.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm a little bit too anxious all the time. And the minute I go to Goa and I see the green and it's like my whole nervous system kind of rests, goes to a state of rest. Do you think one of the reasons for increasing autism is the fact that we're just taking away nature and greenery at such an expansive rate?
That's really interesting you asked me, because I have like some friends who are still researchers in the space of autism. I studied autism in 2009, and ever since then I've just been an intervention. I spend lesser time in research. But some of my research, like core research friends, are now trying to find correlations between environment, pollution, and autism, and how when certain chemicals, when mixed with environment, are causing the rise of autism. So it's so interesting that you brought it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's something I intuitively feel, that the fact that we don't have kids in nature, that kids just don't get that time to and then I'm sure our environments really do affect our genes, right? So it's it's one of those things where we think that our genetic code is kind of it's stuck. There are certain things that are stuck, but we can influence so much of it. And I think one of the negative ways we influence it is by just not spending any time in nature.
I just think like it's also cramped and tight. And today in India, 1 out of every 100 under 10-year-olds is diagnosed on the autism spectrum, which is just such a big number. Every second low-income school that I go into, there are 40 kids in a class, and there'll be 2 or 3 on the spectrum of autism. And that just like freaks me out, because I'm just like, that child is overstimulated, his head is bursting, as is the teachers, as is everybody else's, and it's just a dire situation. And we place these young, naive social workers, and I'm just like, I'm so sorry I'm doing this to you, but I promise you it's worth the work. And yeah.
So when I started my first Kangaroo Kids in 1993, we didn't even have that much information, about all of this. And I just and it's interesting because one of my friends who's watching, who's actually became my friend because her kid went to my school. I kind of picked up that there's something wrong with the child because the child's not making eye contact, and there were certain red flags that I saw. And so then I got her kind of into to sort of to ask her to do some sort of testing, and then she came back distraught. But it's
Right.
amazing that that the child today, who's an adult,
Mm.
if you meet her, you wouldn't even know she's. I mean, there'll be certain she doesn't want to hug.
Yeah.
A little bit of social distance, but she's a brilliant artist.
Yeah.
So um, it, it's interesting that because I knew I was going to talk to you,
Yeah.
and the only one we know is Greta Thunberg because we put her in our curriculum,
Right.
is that there are so many gifted autistic kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Oh, 100%. I mean, I've learned my writing and my art and my history and my science because of the autistic kids that I've worked with. It's just they've just been brilliant.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
yeah. So it's so interesting. Yeah. Sorry.
sorry.
Go on.
No. So one of the things is, we only have one hub, right?
Yeah.
Where it's very few
Yeah.
kids, so it's very easy to kind of train teachers to identify these flags,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. But it'd be really interesting to know how you're doing it with low-income schools.
Yeah.
How do teachers actually identify a child who's autistic, and then how do you train them to kind of deal with that child?
Yeah.
I'd love to know so that we can include some of it in our school.
So I think awareness as of 2025 has got a lot better. I mean, a teacher knows when there's a child who's acting out, who's too smart, who's echolalic is when they're repeating things that you're saying. So I think schools have become good at, even the low income schools have become good at sending a child out for diagnosis and getting that done. But I think what is the problem is that there's so many needs in a low income classroom. I mean, there's so many needs in a general classroom, but in a low income classroom, you've got malnutrition and domestic violence, and parents are coming from like families which have so many other issues that the school just can't accommodate the needs of a child on the spectrum. So what I do is I'm just thinking that how do we give these few kids the best that we can. So the social workers go and I train them and I supervise them, and we kind of pull them out and push them in, and we work with the other teachers on a little bit of how do you like do a little bit of ABA, a little bit of reading remediation, acceleration where it's needed, things like that. But diagnosis has become easier. My worry actually is that I hope they don't get moved to a special school because the inclusive BMC school or the inclusive low income school couldn't provide them support. Yeah.
So my nephew again is at the extreme end of the spectrum, so he
Yeah.
will need to go to a special school.
Yeah.
But it'd be, I'd wonder how I would manage him in a classroom of 30 kids that we have today.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
have any, I've been trying to help my sister-in-law with sort of creating sensory friendly places. What sort of strategies do you suggest to parents? And then I'll kind of talk about some of the strategies that,
Yeah.
I'm not a specialist like you, but I'd love to know.
Yeah. No. I think a good inclusive school is run by people who are not even like specialists in autism. People who just get kids. I think that's
Yeah.
good enough. So Lena, like when I worked in like private schools in New York and like big funded organizations in Indonesia and Hong Kong, I think it was easy for us to make cozy corners and reading hubs and little like timeout spaces and bean bags and just like nice noise cancellation headphones and things like that. The kid just like we used to make them self-advocates to say that I need a break, and they knew that what they needed to do, they needed to go for a walk or wear headphones or whatever. In a low-income school where that kind of privilege isn't possible, we're still trying to get them to be like, I need air. So they'll go out for a walk with the teacher and come back in, or I just need to hug a stuffed toy, because sometimes just that feeling of touch or that feeling of like sensory pressure that they get is good enough. So most low income schools get donated stuffed toys. So we were teaching autistic kids to be able to like hug a stuffed toy when he's overwhelmed, and things like that. But I think that a well-funded school can provide all kinds of teaching a kid not to escape work for a sensory break, but like schedule it and provide that. And for a low income school, whatever like our nature provides, I kind of like get them to ask for that. Yeah.
So one of the things we're kind of trying to get parents to understand that there are some advantages of autism, and there are some very, very gifted kids
Yeah.
who and other than that, I mean, these are the only things I know is one is to sort of, as you said, reduce sensory overload,
Yeah.
give them something to comfort them with. I personally believe access to nature is essential. I don't know why, but
Totally. Yeah.
and my nephew is being asked to have a special pet.
Yeah.
I think that pets, dogs trained now to actually deal with the kids who will, use them as a soother.
Yeah.
And I think the other
Yeah.
thing that we kind of keep telling parents is lots of routine,
Yeah.
and kids have to know that this is predictable in my life. This is what will show up. This is when it'll show up, and
Yeah.
and how it'll show up. Yeah, I think one of the other things I get concerned about is there's so much less emotional time that parents have with kids,
Yeah.
and how essential that is. I mean, not just even to autistic kids, I think to all kids.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. No, so I think what's interesting is that sometimes, like when you got a moderate on, many times the schools that I've worked in have been kind enough to take kids who are moderate on the spectrum of autism, which means it's hard for them to sit in class, hard for them to follow directions, read, write, do things like that. And I've sometimes stubbornly, Lena, advocated for them to stay, like keep them in the inclusive classroom. I don't know why your nephew is on the spectrum, but like sometimes like within a year or two, you see a moderate autism kid settle in, and in an inclusive classroom. And for that, sometimes you have to be the hard taskmaster who's just like, dude, I know you're overwhelmed, I know the whole class is screaming, but you've just got to stick it through. Or I know this task is really long, or like this is too much for you, but let's just do it. Or like this assembly is too loud, but let's just stick through it. So I also like kind of like teach them strategies to stick through the noise and overstimulation. And I think that helps with inclusion because they can't escape this, most of them. So how do you settle into inclusion is a big part of my work with low income schools and the schools that I worked with. And I try to tell parents this also. How do we like make them hardy enough to stick it through? Yeah.
I think the challenges is autism is such a broad conceptual term, right? It's just like the spectrum is so wide.
Right.
Yeah, my nephew ties on one end of the spectrum. I mean, very, very high need.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, he's now 5 and he doesn't speak. He doesn't. He's just done. He can just do and b, not even other sounds. So it's So he's yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I one of the things I am also trying to get parents, because a lot of parents don't appreciate neurodivergent kids in their neurotypical classroom.
Yeah.
And one of the things I try to talk to parents about is how beneficial it is, not just for the children who are neurodivergent, but even for the children who are neurotypical, right? That it's beneficial to both.
Yeah, no, 100%. Some of my very like classic autism kids who grew with age to be really smart. Initially, I was just like, they're a mess. Like, how am I going to keep them in this inclusive classroom? But within 2 or 3 years, they started to accelerate and excel. And they were just like so focused. Like some of them were excellent at piano. Some of them were excellent like science fiction writers. Some of them were excellent mathematicians. It had such a good impact on the rest of the kids in the classroom because the rest of the kids were just bumming around doing their thing. But these autistic kids were great kids, but also like just really academically or artistically strong. So it was just like a really good influence. And just kind and earnest and
Can I ask you
Yeah.
personal question. I believe that we all always have a very strong why we get into something. I
Yeah.
mean, I've got a strong why I got into education.
Yeah.
Can I ask you where your interest kind of stems from?
I think like I just saw a child. Like I mean, I'd grown up where my mom would like my mom used to be a school principal for lots of schools as we were growing up, and my family was traveling around the country. But I just saw a child on the like a 15, 14-year-old, really like a desperate, trying 14, 15-year-old on the spectrum. And I was 19 at that time. 19 or 20, and I just didn't think ever. All my friends were joining big multinationals and like doing other big stuff, and I was at Lady Shriram College, and I was just like, I can do anything in my life. And there was this 14-year-old boy just freaking out, his ears shut, he had to be like tied up and taken away. And that like just impacted me so much as a young girl. I was just like, why don't I make my life in the space of autism? So it was a little freaky for everybody in my family. They're like, what? Like we spent so much money on you studying and getting here, and now you want to go and like teach autistic kids. And that's it. Like it's been 15, 16 years, and that's all I've ever done.
We need more people like you in this world.
Yeah, it just shook me, and ever since then, I mean that kind of like always like when I see a child in desperate need who's just like can't help himself, it just like freaks me out, and I'm like, let's do everything we can to help him. So yeah, I mean, I read a little bit about why you got into education, but I'd love to hear more.
Well, I actually got into education because I witnessed as a teenager a tragedy that happened, the Jim Jones tragedy, and it was a mass murder suicide. Like parents fed poison to their kids, and then and I just it just got me fascinated and alarmed at the same time as to how the human brain that's does everything to survive, how that could happen. And then so I sort of got really interested in how programming of the brain happens, and suddenly I just sort of thought that what if we could program for good? What if people kind of have this negative impact from any pain that they experience, but what if we could actually get kids to think about how to program the world for good and how to program their brain for good? And could we give strategies and resources to kind of to cognitive behavioral therapy to actually reframe when they have a challenge, etc., etc. So yeah, so all our work is around that. We teach kids more about their brains and their behavior than anything else. We weave it through all the content.
But like talk a little bit more about it, because I mean sometimes when I meet a 13-year-old on the spectrum, I try to explain it to them that you're on the spectrum of autism. This is what it means. So I do a little bit of that, but I'd love to learn like how do you guys do it? What does it take?
Well, we basically to have children understand that their thoughts sort of create feelings, and their feelings create thoughts, and that circular loop. Can you get the loop to pause? And we do it with younger kids through stories like Ruby's Got a Worry, and how do you pause a worry? How do you give it language and context? And so a lot about emotional mastery, right? Because the future of the world's around self-mastery. Tomorrow you can learn anything you want. I mean, anything you really are passionate about, you can learn. But are you do you have enough self-mastery to focus, to have the right discipline, to have the right habits to actually do that?
No, that's amazing. I'd love to have you guys maybe do some workshops with those low-income schools that we work with, because this would just be so amazing for them. Yeah,
we'd love to do that.
No, that's amazing. That's amazing. And you know what? Something really interesting that I've seen in the last 10 years. So I got into the field of autism in 2008-ish. And over the last 5 years since I moved to Hong Kong, which was 2016 till today, I've just seen more and more women on like the male to female ratio is 1:4, and suddenly I'm seeing a lot more girls being diagnosed on the spectrum of autism, a lot more older women coming out with an autism diagnosis. And I find that really interesting, because I think it's the same thing about, stories and, like opening up women to break out of the social stereotypes that they've been fit into is helping a lot of women actually find themselves and not get fit into a mold. So that's one more reason why I think we're seeing a rise in autism numbers, because a lot more women are today being diagnosed than they were 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. Yeah, it's super cool. Yeah.
So,
Huh.
so
Any more
next,
tips on caregivers? I mean, I'm actually really curious before we like get into, the intervention that you guys do with Harry Potter and breeding and all of that. I'm like, I want to learn, because you run big schools. I want to learn from you what kind of like parent support, family support do you guys provide, and what does that mean?
um, so when I was running Billabong High, it was a much larger community. Right now,
Yeah.
we're largely online, and I feel online also has a benefit to kids who are mildly autistic, because it's
Yeah.
so focused.
Yeah.
The other distractions kind of get cut out. But when I had Billabong High, I did a lot more work, and I'd be really happy to share some of it with you. The early awareness tools that we would provide for teachers to just look at a child and go through like a checklist. So just putting enough systems in place to even just identify children. And hiring a lot of special educators and counselors, which today is a lot easier than in 1993 when I started.
Totally, yeah. Wow. That's
But I
awesome.
think also, building communities for parents. A lot of parents, when a child has a diagnosis, the parents don't actually know what it means and how intense to get about it, or how concerned, how worried, and just having a community of other moms kind of really helps.
That's totally true. And I think like what I've seen, especially with parents on the spectrum of autism, and this is despite like this is not just low income families, but all families across all countries, races, cultures, whatever, that I've seen that first there's denial. But like after denial, there's like this victimization that comes into the parents. And I keep telling families like I know you have a child on the spectrum and it's really hard right now, but try to find all the resources you can to rise out of it, and to advocate that I need this and the government should provide that, and this school should provide that and the state should provide that. Because I think like lots of times families go into this victim mode that now my life is over and everything, and I fully get it. I understand it emotionally completely. So a lot of my work is how do I empower families to actually get the government and state and schools to provide them what is required, what they deserve if they have a child on the spectrum, so that they can support their child better.
So I mean, my brother and his child lives in Australia, and support them is so phenomenal.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm living in India, and there's not that much
Totally.
from the government.
Yeah. The low income schools, just they're so stretched for just basic support right now. The government just doesn't, cater to all the needs. So yeah, that's where we are. Okay, so let's get to the fun part about like what kind of teaching strategies, Harry Potter. Like I'd love to learn from you about what kind of stuff you use.
So again and again, we want kids to understand how unique we are, and how each one is, and we're actually all have very, very different brains, and we're constantly teaching them about their brains and behavior more than content. That's the future of what they need mastery over. But it's interesting, and I actually wanted my curiosity and excitement architect, who creates the plan, especially this one that I love so much, to be online, but she's got a cold, so I'm gonna kind of talk about what she's done. But what she's done is Komal's taken Greta Thunberg as her hook, right, as an emotional entry into the lesson, because it's relatable, right? It's, you know, Greta Thunberg, and she's when we explain like how she's a young environmentalist, we show the Facebook post, and she's neurodivergent, right? So she's got Asperger's, she's got ADHD, but that how she's still made such a huge impact on the world, so that we should not take our challenges and feel like we're confined by them. We can actually and she's actually said that it's because she's got OCD and she's got ADHD, and is a large reason why she's been able to kind of do what she's doing with so much.
Yeah.
So that sort of sets the stage for getting kids to understand neurodiversity. But then, you know, she's done this with the book Harry Potter, and she's done it so beautifully, because then she's kind of deepened it by connecting it to you know, the diversity in Harry Potter, which is, you know, you have the mudbloods and the purebloods, and you've got different types of people in the wizarding world. And so then that gets them to understand that we've all got really we're very individual, even within a sort of within a community, and it does it through giving them some familiarity around that kind of concept. And then finally, you know, they understand neurodiversity through videos and activities and stuff like that. And then the end of it, they're kind of creating awareness campaigns.
That's awesome.
And because for us, any session that we have has to end with kids demonstrating their understanding of the concept. So then sort of, you know, applying their understanding to promote inclusivity and respect for neurodiversity is how the kids sort of end their session.
That's amazing.
So
that's awesome. Yeah. And what are you seeing? Like, are you seeing children more like talking a lot more about neurodiversity and autism and
so it's amazing that because this is in grade 4, right? It's amazing that in grade 4 they understand all of this conceptually by the end of it. And I think it's just when kids start thinking about this is all normal, and not that it's, you know, it's a class apart, or it's a childhood apart from the ones that, I think that awareness itself starts building an understanding. You know, we do so many books. We do this book, then we do the book Wonder, then we and then we do one where the protagonist is Melody. That's also about that's a physical sort of handicap, but we're constantly doing through stories, getting kids to empathize with characters and understand, you know.
No, I love that, because like a lot of children on the spectrum of autism, when they're born, like one of the first signs is they lack social cues, and, you know, like social innuendos, or like, you know, understanding if somebody is saying go away, like it could just be a joke, they'll actually go away, like, you know, like they just miss these things. Language is difficult for them, so a lot of social stories help them, but sometimes social stories are so boring that these autistic kids are just like, dude, why are you doing this with me? It's like a civics lesson. So I just think, like, you know, just including actual real people, Greta Thunberg, or like, you know, Up, or you know, Inside Out, or things like that, Wonder, are just such good ways for them to like feel emotionally alive. No, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's beautiful.
Question. I don't know if you've seen The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
So a question is, do you think Sheldon is autistic?
I think like a lot of like these, I don't know, but a lot of these like science nerdy people sometimes like he could be. I don't know if like The Big Bang Theory gets analyzed by someone, maybe they'll say he's on the spectrum. Could be. Could be. Yeah. Some of my Asperger's, high functioning autistic kids resembled a lot of what Sheldon is in Big Bang Theory, so could be. Yeah.
You because you just said, you know, lack social cues, really picking up on social cues and things like that. So Sounds like Sheldon.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah. No, but they've got some of them have got such a good sense of humor. It's just like it's amazing. I mean, one of the best British comedians, Hannah Gadsby, is on the spectrum of autism. So they've just got like this dark and this very straight sense of humor, flat sense of humor. It's fabulous. So I actually like when we're working with low income schools or even like regular schools. I use this program called the Linda Moodbell Visualizing and Verbalizing Toolkit, which is a lot about helping children actually see the world as they read it. Because many times, like, I have autistic kids who just like memorize everything that they're reading or memorize film dialogues. So I had like a teenager. Every time I'd walk into the class after lunch to see what their class, I was an advisor for a high school. I'd see this boy like just saying, "How you doing? What's up?" And I'm just like, "Stop! Like, dude, like no girl is gonna go out on a date with you if you say this to her." So a lot of our work was helping them like read text, but like ask structure questions for them to be able to like visualize the text. So like, where is he going? Why do you think he's going there? What's gonna happen next? What color is this? What mood is this? So that kind of like structure words to infiltrate their reading and watching habits helped a lot with comprehension of the real world. It's a great program. It's called Linda Moodbells. And then I'm like a big fan of traditional old school teaching, like just like drill and repetition of certain things. Um,
I just
that always helps a lot. Sorry, yeah.
wrote the word Linda Moodbells down,
Yeah.
so I can look it up.
Yeah. It's called the visual. It's for maths and for reading. It's visualizing and verbalizing. It's so good. And yeah, that's basically. Otherwise, like we try to stick to curriculum, a lot of scaffolding, a lot of like using abstract objects to explain. Um, yeah, that's basically our realm of work. But I've just seen like I don't believe in God per se, but I've seen God in classrooms, and I just feel like every time I feel like this irrational stuff around parents praying a lot and all of that, but I just see God in classrooms so often. You'll see a child who was non-verbal suddenly be like Didi mat jao, and I'm like, oh, like, or like he'll say kauwe ki book padhni hai, and like this child had not spoken in 3 weeks. So I just see like magic sometimes erupt in spaces where I'm working with kids on the spectrum. So I think that's also one of the reasons I've stayed for so long.
So when I see my nephew Ty, when I look into his eyes, I say that like I see the universe through his eyes. There's just so much of depth in his eyes.
Yeah.
He may not speak, but he speaks through in so many different.
I love that. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Okay, awesome. Anything else? We're at 7:40. Anything else that you'd like to share about Dreamtime Learning?
No, I'm going to make sure that I do an offline with you.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I'd love to work at a deeper level with you. In terms of Dreamtime Learning, if kids have ADHD or sensory processing, online school is just brilliant for them.
Amazing.
They don't have to pick up on social cues within a classroom, so they're not trying to do two things. And we just find that kids get through, and because it's done in half the time, right? So school gets over in half a day, and they've got the rest of the day to do whatever else they want to do. And this is for all kids, it's just but we find with kids who are mildly autistic and have mild ADHD, online school kind of helps them a lot.
That's amazing. Okay. No, I mean, I think sometimes with autistic kids, they just need that one-on-one support. But like maybe for some of them who are at a higher level, that would just be amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. But let's connect offline because like I'd love to see if you guys come with this enhanced worldly wise way of teaching. So it'd be great if you could do some workshops with us, and I'd be happy to like do whatever I could also. So
100%.
yeah,
We don't have anything that's so specialized in the world of
autism.
autism per
Yeah,
se, but yeah,
yeah,
but general teacher training, growth mindset responses, all
yeah,
of that, lots of
yeah.
training.
That'd be
We'd be really happy.
amazing. Like our social workers would just love to get trained in all this. So I'm gonna connect with you on some of that.
100%.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Lena. This is so great. Just like it felt like we're sitting in your living room and chatting. This was awesome. Thank you
Thanks
so much.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody who joined. This was so nice. Thank you. Bye, guys. See you.
Bye.
Thank you.